and become a monk. And then Ghatikara replies, he says, "My friend Jyotipala, don't you know that I support my blind and aged parents?" So apparently Ghatikara is the only son, or at least the only son who's still living with the parents, who hasn't gotten married and moved away. And so it falls to Ghatikara to support his old blind parents. And so now comes the big surprise that when Ghatikara replies in this way, then Jyotipala, who is before so severely upbraiding and denigrating the Buddha, says, in that case, I'll go forth from the home life into homelessness. You know, so we can imagine that even though Jyotipala had been denigrating the Buddha, speaking ill of him, this was probably because he had been born in the Brahmin class, and this is replicating the situation in India at the time of the Buddha, where there was a kind of rivalry between the Brahmins and the Samanas. And the Brahmins, because they arrogated to themselves special privileges as being the ones who preserved the Vedas, the ones who performed the priestly ceremonies, the sacrifices, they thought that they were superior to the ascetics who would just put on, you know, ragged robes made out of rags and travel around without a home. And the Brahmins would marry, usually marry and beget children. And so they would preserve, you know, the generations. They would preserve the human race from generation to generation, whereas the Samanas observed celibacy. Okay, so as a young Brahmin, those, you could say, the tendencies towards this condemning attitude towards the Samanas would have been planted in his mind. But I would imagine that over many lives, you know, hundreds and thousands of lives, even many world cycles, the person who is now Jyotipala had been a follower of the Buddha, had made a vow under the Buddha to become a Buddha in the future. He had practiced paramis or paramitas. So he had, you know, a vast treasury of wholesome accumulations deep in the deep strata of his mind. But it's like something like a jewel mine, which is covered over by a layer of soil, of dirt. So if you just see the dirt, you think this is just useless land. You know, we could throw refuse here. But if we dig a little bit and we just crack through that layer of dirt, then we come upon the rocks that are holding the jewels. And so Jyotipala's mind must have been like that. So there are the jewels of his paramitas and his merits there, his meritorious deeds. But because he was born as a young Brahmin, he was always been conditioned by his, you know, maybe his parents, his elders, who were saying, you know, look at those ascetics, they're not working for a living, they don't recite the Vedas, they don't marry and have children, they're just traveling around in rags, they're begging for their food, useless fellows. Okay, but now once he heard the Buddha speak, you know, the text doesn't give us any details, but when the Buddha gave the discourse, it sort of broke through. It was like a spade breaking through that layer of soil, and it reached his, you know, it awakened a deep response in his heart. And so he made his determination to go forth and become a monk under the Buddha. Okay, so having made that decision, the two young friends go to the Buddha, and maybe Jyotipala is still a little shy, and so Ghatikara is the one who speaks to the Buddha and says, "This is, again, my friend, the Brahmin student Jyotipala. He wants to go forth and become a monk." And so then the Buddha gave Jyotipala the going forth, and he gave him the full admission or full ordination into the Sangha. Okay, so then after 2 weeks go by, 2 weeks after the ordination, the Buddha, together with his community of monks, they leave Vaibhalinga and they travel to Benares, which somehow conveniently happens to be there, 20,000 years before the time, at least 20,000 years before the time of Gautama Buddha. And so they eventually arrive at Benares, and then they go to live in the deer park at Isipatana. Again, I'd say it's wonderful, it's marvelous that all of these places from the Buddha Gautama's time also are present in the time of the Buddha Kassapa. Okay, now at that time, the king of Kasi is the state, the Indian state where Benares, of which Benares is the capital. Kasi would probably correspond largely to at least two parts, I'd say to the central part of Uttarakuru. Not Uttarakuru. Wow, this is terrible. I'm really getting old. There's Bihar, the state to the north and a little bit west of Bihar. It's the largest state in India, where Delhi is located. Uttar Pradesh. Uttar Pradesh. Thank you. I didn't want to ask your age in public. Okay, so the king, Kiki, hears that the Buddha Kassapa has come to the deer park at Isipatana, and he goes to the Buddha, pays homage to him, exchanges greetings with him, hears a Dhamma discourse from him, and then paragraph 15, he invites the Buddha, together with the community of monks, to come to his palace the next day to take their meal. And so the Buddha Kassapa, following the tradition, accepts in silence. Probably he just doesn't stay silent, but he probably makes a little gesture like this. It's a way, this is a rather unique South Asian gesture of saying yes. I think it's in India as well as Sri Lanka. Somebody, a writer, described it as if one were to delineate a figure 8 with one's chin. You know it. In America, when we indicate yes, we go like this. But at least this is what I learned in Sri Lanka, and I think it's done in India. When people indicate yes, it's done something like. So when I first came to Sri Lanka, when I would be coming to my teacher for lessons, I say, the first few days, I say, "Bhante, can I come to see you tomorrow afternoon for my Pali lesson?" You go like this. So I didn't come. So then when he saw me, he said, "Why didn't you come?" I said, "Didn't you indicate that I shouldn't come for the lesson?" So he said, "What made you think that?" I said, "When I asked you whether I should come, you went? I said, oh, in our country, that means yes. So one has to learn how things are indicated. So I think the Buddha probably, when the king invited him, would have gone like that. Okay, so then King Kiki went back to the palace, and then he would have ordered his kitchen even the night before, late at night, to start preparing for the next day's meal. And then they prepare very high quality rice, and with various sauces and curries. These are different curry dishes. And then when the morning comes, he informs the Buddha and the monks that the meal is ready. You can come to the palace. And so then the Buddha and all of the monks, they put on their full set of robes and they go to the palace, and then they sit down at the seats that are offered. And then the king serves the Buddha and the monks with a meal. Then after, when the meal is finished, he sits down on a low seat next to the Buddha, and then he says to the Buddha, this starts the quite important passage. He says, Venerable Sir, Bhante, let the Blessed One accept from me a residence for the rains here in Benares, so I can do such service to the Sangha. Okay, now what is this residence for the rains? Now this was a custom established even in India before the time of the Buddha amongst the different ascetic communities in India and parts of Southeast Asia as well. The seasons are very fixed, and there's a particular season which begins usually about middle of July, and it lasts till about the middle of October. It varies from year to year. We would say sometimes early July till early October, late July to late October, when the monsoon rain arrives. And so every day there are heavy rains falling, and so it's very difficult to travel around. So in India, it had become the custom, going back to time immemorial, for the different ascetic communities to settle down in one place for the 3 months of the rains, during the rainy period. And they call that now the rains retreat or the rainy season residence. And it then becomes customary, at least this is done in the Buddhist tradition, sometimes people will ask one monk or a group of monks, rather than just having them live in their own regular monasteries, they'll invite them, they'll build a special residence for them. Or there'll be maybe a cottage, which is a bungalow, which is not being used, that they have. And they'll invite them, please come here and stay for the rainy season. We will provide you with all of your requisites. And then the monks will stay there for the rains retreat, 3 months of the rains retreat. And the supporters will provide them with, their food each day and any other requisites that they need. And so the Buddha, when the Buddha established the Sangha, then he instituted this practice for the Buddhist monastics as well. And so now the king has this in mind when he invites the Buddha to stay at Benares for the rainy season. But the Buddha politely rejects this invitation from the king. He says, enough, king, I already have my residence for the rainy season. I've already made a pledge to observe the rainy season someplace else. The king probably thinks, well, I'm the really powerful, I'm the ruler of the land. Maybe the Buddha just has to be asked a few more times. So he asked him a second time, a third time, please come and stay here for the rains. But a second time, a third time, the Buddha refuses. Okay, then the king, when he's refused 3 times, he becomes very disappointed and sad. Okay, so now the Buddha wants to cheer up the king. I think that might be his motive. I'm sorry. The king is the one who asked the question first. So he says, maybe he's asking this with the pride of a king. You know, since the king is thinking there can't be anybody more powerful, wealthier, more generous than I am. So he asked the Buddha, do you have a better superior than I am? You know, somebody who's superior to me? And the Buddha says, I do, great king. And then he says that there's this town called Vebalinga, and there dwells a potter named Ghatikara. And he is my supporter, my chief supporter. When he says that, what is the king thinking? What? What might he be thinking? I don't think, though, that he's thinking so much in class terms, though it's on the right track. Not quite being made fun of, but say again? Yeah. He's like a bit shocked and astonished that he's like the most powerful guy in this part of India. And the Buddha says that his superior supporter, his chief supporter, you know, is just this Harry the plumber or, you know, Tom the taxi driver. You know, it's like, well, I don't especially like Jamie time, but okay, I go into, maybe, say I go to California, by chance I meet, what's his name, Bill Gates, okay. Bill Gates says, Bhante, we want to build a little cottage for you near the Microsoft office, where is it? Washington State? Or maybe I meet the chief executive of IBM. He says, we want to build a little cottage for you to stay for the rains, you know, near our headquarters. And I say, thank you very much, but I have this you know, some quite ordinary supporters and near Chuang Monastery, and they'll look after me during the rains. Maybe a guy who's a computer, working in the computer, well, then Bill Gates might use his influence. Somebody who's working in tech industry in, was it New Jersey Technical University? He says, what is that guy? I'm Bill Gates. I'm Jamie Dimon. Okay, but now the Buddha is going to explain. Okay, so he says, you were very disappointed and sad, great king, but the Pada Ghatikara, he never gets upset. He never gets disappointed. You know, I guess his mind is always equanimous. And now the Buddha is going to explain the virtues of the Pada Ghatikara. The Ghatikara has, first, he's gone for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So apparently the king, we can infer, hasn't even gone for taking the refuges yet. But he's just, maybe the king is just, has a generous temperament, and he likes to support ascetics, but he hasn't really specifically taken refuge in the Buddha yet. And then the Pada Ghatikara is one who observes the 5 precepts. He abstains from killing, from stealing, sexual misconduct, from false speech, and from using intoxicants. Okay, so what is being indicated at this point? Just take taking the refuges and precepts together. Wait. Maybe take the microphone.
First is the discussion of class.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to do that.
Yeah.
And it's got Ghatikara, who's the lower class.
Yeah.
And it's Ghatikara, who is the friend of the Buddha.
Oh, the supporter of the Buddha, yeah.
So I'm just wondering if the Buddha ever had anything to say about classes. Or did he see people as evil?
Yeah, the Buddha spoke about social classes. Yeah, I don't want to go into this now because it would take us a little bit off track. But maybe to put it in a nutshell, the Buddha didn't try to revolutionize or reform the Indian. First, the class system that existed in the Buddha's time, we wouldn't call it the same as the caste system that exists in India today. But society was divided into 4 social classes. The Brahmins, who were the priestly class, the Kshatriyas, who were the administrators, the rulers, and the warriors, the Vaishyas, who were like the business class, and the landowners, and the Shudras, who were the working class. And then there were people outside the class system who performed what was considered the low and menial type of work, the really low and menial type of work, like collecting garbage and refuse and sweeping up excrement and things like that, and handling corpses. Okay, that class system later sort of became ossified in the form of the caste system with many subdivisions. So the Buddha didn't actually try to transform the class system, maybe because he saw that it was just so deeply established in India. But what he said is that one's sort of the true test, or the true criteria for judging a person is not the class that he belongs to, but the person's moral qualities and wisdom. And within the monastic order himself, within the monastic order itself, he abolished the class distinctions. So everybody who becomes ordained gives up their class designation and becomes known just simply as a monastic. Use the
He's making a statement to the king
yeah.
about that as well. I don't need this from you, I have this other person.
Yeah.
Even though this other person comes from this lower.
Yeah. I would say that is what's being indicated by the Buddha's first statement when he says that my chief supporter is the Pada Ghatikara. But now when the Buddha mentions the going for refuge and the 5 precepts, maybe I'll just say what this is. It's just, we say, the basic observances of a good lay Buddhist. So the first step, going for refuge. Second step, taking the 5 precepts. But now something stronger is going to be indicated by what comes next. He has unwavering confidence, that's unshakable confidence in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and he possesses the virtues loved by the noble ones. So something is being indicated here. One has to know a little bit the technical implications of unwavering confidence. Anybody know what that is? Well, that's being indicated by the next. Okay, let's take these two together. He has unwavering confidence in the Buddha and so on, and he is free from doubt about suffering, about the origin of suffering, about the cessation of suffering, and about the way leading to the cessation of suffering. What does that indicate? Okay, you're on the right track. At least a stream enterer. So it means that he's entered the stream of the Dhamma and he's bound for liberation. So he's a noble one, an Aryan. But we'll see that he's not just a stream enterer. Okay, now comes some additional virtuous qualities that don't really fall neatly into any category, but basically they show that Ghatikara, even though he's living the home life, because he has to support his parents, but you could say he's in the home, he's living the life of a monk without ordination. He eats only one meal a day, and that would almost certainly be before the middle of the day. He observes celibacy, so he's celibate, and he's virtuous, of good character. So eating only one meal a day, or only one part of a day in the forenoon, observing celibacy, those are qualities of the monk. He has laid aside gems and gold, given up gold and silver. Again, that's like a monastic precept. And he does not dig the ground for clay with a pick or with his own hands. As a potter, he would use the clay to make the pots, but there's a monastic precept against digging the ground or cutting through the ground, probably to protect the living beings, the beings that live in the soil. So Ghatikara doesn't even dig the ground, but to get the clay, he takes the soil that's broken off from riverbanks or that's thrown up by rats, and he uses that to make his pots. And then he doesn't sell the pots for money, but he lays out the pots, the jars and the pots. Probably he has some shelves in front of his house. And he says, if anybody wants the pot, they can take the pots, but they should put down some foodstuffs as a kind of exchange. It's like a barter system. Some rice, beans, the lentils, and so on. And then, like a good, devoted young man, a very kind and helpful character, he supports his blind and aged parents. So all of these show how Ghatikara is of good character. And then comes the sort of, maybe the giveaway to his status. The Buddha says, having destroyed the 5 lower fetters, he is one who will reappear or be reborn spontaneously in the pure abodes and attain final nirvana, final liberation there, without ever coming back from that world. So from this we can know what is the status or level of Ghatikara. Exactly, he's a non-returner. That's the stream enterer is like the first level of realization. Then the second level is the level of the once returner, and the third level is the level of non-returner. He's not yet fully liberated, but he's cut off the 5 lower fetters. That's the fetters that bind us to this world of sensual desire. And so he's taken rebirth in the pure abodes, and there he'll achieve final liberation. Okay, now the Buddha tells some stories about some of the behavior or some of the aspects, some further aspects of the potter Ghatikara. Okay, so the Buddha here, this gets a little confusing. Okay, this is the Buddha Kassapa. It's actually the Buddha Gautama telling the story placed in the mouth of the Buddha Kassapa. Buddha Kassapa relating the virtues of Ghatikara. So it's like a play within a play, a story within a story. So Buddha Kassapa is saying, one time when I was living at Vebalinka in the morning, I went with my bowl to Ghatikara's house, and then the parents were there, so I asked them, where is the potter? And the parents replied that your supporter has gone out, but you can take some rice from the cauldron and some sauce. So this would be like probably lentils, dal, curry dal, or curried beans of some sort. You take it and eat. So the Buddha does so and leaves. Then later, when Ghatikara returns, somehow he must notice that the rice and the sauces have been taken. So he says, who has taken the food from the cauldron? And then the parents say, it was the Buddha Kassapa who did that. Then instead of Ghatikara getting angry and upset and thinking, but there's nothing left for me to eat, he thinks it's a gain for me. I'm so fortunate. It's been such a great benefit for me that the Buddha Kassapa has so much trust in me that he'll just take the food that's left in the cauldron and the saucepan. And so when he heard this, then Ghatikara became filled with rapture and happiness, piti and sukha, for 2 weeks. And his parents were also happy for a full week, because they have the heart or the mind of generosity and the mind of deep devotion to the Buddha and the Dharma. And so when they hear this, then they become full of joy. Okay, another time the same thing happens, except the food is the porridge rather than rice. And again, they become filled with joy and happiness. Okay, the third incident, one time the Buddha, when he apparently there was some grass thatching on his cottage, and it was probably wearing thin. And so he sends the monks to the potter's house to find out if he has any extra grass, not like grass here, but more like hay, to be used for thatching of the roof. And so he says, go find out if there's any grass or hay on the potter's house that can be used for my cottage. And the monks report that there's no grass over his house, at his house, but there's grass thatch over his workshop. And now the Buddha, this would seem a bit presumptuous, for an ordinary person to do this. But the Buddha says, go monks. I think I would get angry if I came back to Taishu Hall. I saw a hole in my roof. I asked Jin Li, who came and removed the tiles from the roof of Taishu Hall. And she said, oh, Buddha Shakyamuni was here, and he sent the monks to take off the tiles from your roof. Even though I'm a monk, I was start grumbling and complaining. How can the Buddha do that? What he wants to drive me away from Taishu Hall. It's going to rain tonight. I'll get drenched with the rain. Go back to his monastery. Tell him I want those tiles back. Okay, but the Buddha sends the monks to the potter's place, And he says, remove the grass from the potter's workshop. Okay, so the monks do so. And then while they're taking away the grass, the potter's parents, they're blind, so they don't know who's doing this. So they ask the monks, who are you guys taking away the grass from the workshop? And the monks say that we are the monks, the disciples of the Buddha Kassapa, and his hut has been leaking and he needs some grass to repair it. And so we want to use the grass for that purpose. And then the parents, they're delighted and they say, take it away, dear ones. Okay, then when the Ghatikara returns, he asks his parents, he's a non-returner, so he doesn't get angry. But he's a little puzzled, so he says, who came around and took away the grass that was covering my workshop? Now there's an open space there. And then the parents say, it was the Buddhist monks who did that, my dear. They were taking the grass in order to repair the hut of the Buddha Kassapa, which has been leaking. Then the Pata Ghatikara, again, he gets filled with joy and happiness. And also the parents, he gets filled with joy and happiness for 2 weeks. And the parents are filled with joy and happiness for a full week. And then a bit of a miracle takes place here, that the workshop remained for 3 whole months. This must be a rainy season when it's raining. So for 3 whole months, it's raining, and there's no grass covering at least the part of the roof, but the rain doesn't come into the workshop. This is probably through what we call the anubhava, the spiritual power or blessing power of the Buddha, or the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Okay, so now the Buddha Kassapa has finished relating the story praising the virtues of his disciple Ghatikara. And when the king hears this, then he becomes full of anumodana or mudita, altruistic joy, sympathetic joy for the Pada Ghatikara. And he says he's so lucky, he's so fortunate that you, the Buddha, rely on him in that way. Okay, now what comes next, the sequel, the last part of the sutta, this is interesting. Have to bear it with equanimity. Don't you guys know I'm speaking about a sutta? I'm lecturing on the Dhamma. Okay, so then the king, he sends, he knows that from the Buddha's story that the potter, he's already low class, so he gets the idea the potter is pretty poor, he has to make pots, and he doesn't even accept any money, but he'll just exchange the pots for gifts of rice and beans and lentils. So the king has 500 cartloads. We have to remember that 500 is usually an exaggerated figure. It just means, many, many cartloads of red rice stored in the sheaf. Apparently this is a kind of high quality rice. And also with, it's called sauce materials to go with it. This would be like lentils, beans, various vegetables, spices, to make the dishes to go along with the rice. Probably some fruits, things for making sweets, all sorts of food ingredients. Okay, so then the king's men, they come to the Pata and they tell him what the king has sent to him. And then Ghatikara replies, the king is very busy and has a lot to do. I have enough. Let this be for the king himself. You can return this to the king. Okay, why does Ghatikara reply in that way? What is this, the message being conveyed here? Do you have the microphone?
I think it's because he's content with
Yeah, okay, that's a very good idea, or a good suggestion, that Ghatikara is content, and we could say that, in a way, this is the Buddha giving a message through the example of Ghatikara to others. The message would be content. Don't be, overly obsessed with gaining excessive luxuries and all the riches and luxuries. And maybe there's another subtle little message that's coming through. I don't know if any of you have had close relations with kings, but if you use your imagination a little.
I do have a supervisor. Gifts usually come with strange attachments.
Okay, that's, yeah. Be a little careful of, getting too close to those in power. Of course, they could have their own agendas in the background. Yeah.
Isn't the king sending these things for Kassapa and his monks?
Yeah. No. He's not sending them for the...
Because the potter...
Ooh, I never thought of it in that way. No, I don't think that's the intention. Because if they were sent with that intention, I think that message would have been given to the potter. These are for the Buddha and the monks. You keep them in your cottage. Then the potter would have accepted them on behalf of the king. But you see, the Ghatikara says, I have enough. So he's indicating that it's understood that the gift is for him. But I have to say also that there's another side to this. So I don't want people to misunderstand, to get the wrong impression. Maybe this is leaning a little bit to the extreme of contentedness. Maybe because the king is giving this gift, maybe as Johnny suggested, maybe with some hidden agenda. So maybe that's why Ghatikara is refusing. Because it's considered polite within the Buddhist monastic circle when some people offer something, it's considered always polite to accept at least some of it. Even if one doesn't need like 500 carts, but he could say, what I would suggest to Ghatikara, okay, you don't have to take all 500 carts, but put out, a pot and let them fill one pot with 2 pots, 1 pot with rice, 1 pot with beans. You could put out some dishes to take the spices and vegetables and other things. So accept some portion, but don't refuse everything. So within the monastic tradition, it's always considered, the polite thing to sort of honor the generosity of others, even if one doesn't need something, to at least accept a little bit. Like, in the days when I was living in Sri Lanka, when we go on alms round, sometimes there might be like 7 houses we might go to. And sometimes by the time we get to the 4th house, people have given rice and some, other dishes to go with the rice. So 7 houses within a hamlet, a cluster of houses. So there's, in the bowl is, we get enough already. The bowl is getting pretty full with 4 houses. But 3 other families, people are standing out with their bowl of rice and there's some other prepared vegetable. So, we want to give them a chance also to make an offering. So, we don't reject them and say, no, I have enough, and then turn around and walk away. But we go to the other houses, we just say, tikak, tikak. It's just like in Chinese, idian dian, just a little bit. And so they'll put like one, like a soup spoonful of rice. Then we say, okay, not gola, eti, enough. And then we take a spoon of the curry, like dal or some vegetable, then go to each of the other 2 houses and accept just a little bit. Because even though it's more than we might need individually, but we give to either some of the other monks or the men who are working in the temple, so that it'll always get used. And if it's too much for them, too often we had to do this, but to give to the monkeys, because we had like 3 troops of monkeys around the hermitage. One would come right at lunchtime, another would come about 12:30, another 3rd group would come about 1 o'clock. Okay, so just the final part of the sutta. Okay, now the Buddha Gautama has finished relating the whole story with that statement. And now we're back to the Buddha Gautama speaking in the present time. So he says, now, Ananda, you may think thus, certainly someone else was, let me put it in better English, certainly the Brahmin student Jyotipala on that occasion was somewhat else, but it should not be regarded in that way. For I was the student, the Brahmin student Jyotipala on that occasion. So here the Buddha Gautama